That night, Ethan never imagined he would be dialing 911 because of someone he once loved. He stood frozen inside his photography studio as Mia, his ex-girlfriend, pounded on the door with a fury he had never seen before. She shouted that the studio was hers, that he had stolen it, that she had every right to walk in. Her voice echoed through the hallway, sharp, frantic, almost unhinged. For a moment, Ethan wondered if she would actually break the lock and force her way inside. He felt his heartbeat climbing, his hands shaking as he backed away from the door, realizing this was no longer just a messy breakup. This was something darker, something that had been building for months without him noticing. When he finally made the call to the police, he knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. Ethan met Mia at a local gallery event, a place where creativity floated in the air, and everyone seemed to glow under dim golden lights. She approached him first, complimenting his photos with a confidence that felt magnetic. From the beginning, she spoke like she understood him better than anyone else, and Ethan, who often worked alone, found her energy refreshing. They started dating soon after, building a rhythm that felt exciting and full of potential. During their first year together, Mia helped Ethan more than he expected. She introduced him to clients, promoted his work on social media, and even stayed late at the studio to assist during big shoots. Ethan appreciated it deeply, believing they functioned like a true team. But slowly, the tone of her help began to shift. She stopped presenting her actions as favors and began speaking as if she were entitled to every success Ethan earned. If he booked a high-profile shoot, she would say it was because she had been the one who pushed him. If a client complimented his talent, she insisted they only trusted him because of her recommendations. Ethan brushed it off at first, thinking she simply wanted recognition. But the comments grew sharper. She said the studio existed because she had built his whole network. When he tried to explain that he appreciated her support but needed his independence, she accused him of being ungrateful. Arguments began over the smallest things. She demanded access to his calendar, questioned every message he received, and insisted she needed keys to the studio to manage things properly. Ethan hesitated, but Mia could be incredibly persuasive when she wanted something. Eventually, he gave her a spare key, hoping it would make things easier. Instead, it became the turning point. Mia started coming to the studio unannounced, rearranging equipment, changing schedules without asking, and inserting herself into client conversations. When Ethan confronted her, she claimed she was only doing what any supportive partner would do. But her presence began to suffocate him. Clients noticed the tension. Some even asked if Mia was a co-owner, and Ethan felt embarrassed correcting them. Whenever he tried to set boundaries, she reacted with dramatic accusations, crying, shouting, or storming out only to return hours later demanding comfort. The emotional swings drained him. He felt trapped between gratitude for what she had once done and discomfort with what she had become. The relationship grew brittle, stretched thin by power struggles and unspoken resentment. Ethan realized he was changing too, quieter, less confident, constantly worrying about how Mia might react to simple decisions. The studio, once his safe creative space, now felt like a place he had to defend. One night, after yet another argument in which Mia claimed she deserved half of everything, Ethan finally said the words he had been avoiding. He wanted to break up. Mia stared at him in disbelief, as if he had committed some kind of betrayal. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She simply said, with a coldness that sent a chill through him, that he would regret this. Ethan didn't know it yet, but that moment marked the beginning of a storm that would nearly destroy his career, his peace, and his sense of safety. In the first week after their breakup, Ethan tried to focus on work, believing time would calm everything down. But Mia didn't disappear the way he expected. Instead, she began slipping into the edges of his life, not with apologies or attempts at reconciliation, but with subtle, calculated acts that felt almost strategic. The first sign was when two clients suddenly canceled their sessions, both giving vague excuses that didn't match their earlier enthusiasm. At first, Ethan assumed it was just bad luck. But then one of them accidentally forwarded a message meant for someone else. A message Mia had sent, claiming Ethan was emotionally unstable and not in the right condition to work. Seeing her words made his stomach twist. He hadn't spoken to her since the breakup, yet she was already trying to undermine his business. It didn't stop there. Mia began showing up at the studio unannounced, letting herself in with the key he'd foolishly given her. Sometimes she would wander around the workspace, touching equipment, inspecting files, and acting as if she still belonged there. Other times she would wait until clients arrived, standing off to the side with a forced smile that made everyone uncomfortable. One afternoon, she walked in during a shoot, insisting she needed to check her space, as if the studio were legally hers. The client froze, confused, while Ethan pulled her aside and begged her to leave. Mia refused. She claimed she had every right to be there because she had invested her time and effort into the studio. It didn't matter that she had never put in $1. She had rewritten the story in her mind, and Ethan was powerless against it. When he changed the locks, thinking it would end the intrusions, she reacted by sending him a long email accusing him of theft, stealing her access, her contributions, her share of the studio. Then came the letter. A formal, intimidating document from a lawyer Ethan had never heard of, demanding recognition of Mia as a co-owner based on her ongoing involvement in the business. The claims were absurd, but the paper was real. Ethan's hands trembled as he read it. He realized she had escalated from emotional manipulation to legal intimidation. Soon after, more strange things began to happen. A supplier emailed asking why they'd received two conflicting sets of instructions about Ethan's upcoming orders. Another client complained about receiving late-night messages from someone named Mia, warning them about working with the wrong photographer. Mia was inserting herself everywhere, creating chaos that made Ethan look disorganized and unreliable. The damage spread faster than he could contain it. Every time he fixed one issue, two more appeared. Friends told him they saw posts and comments online hinting that he had anger issues and violent tendencies. He recognized the tone immediately. Mia was trying to destroy his reputation piece by piece. The final straw came when he found her inside the studio again, this time sitting on his office chair, scrolling through emails on his computer. When he demanded to know what she was doing, she simply smirked and said she was checking what belonged to her. Ethan finally understood that this wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't desperation. It was control. And she wasn't willing to let go, no matter how far she had to go to sabotage him. The morning everything escalated began quietly, almost peacefully, the kind of day Ethan hoped would finally pass without any disturbance. He arrived early to prepare for a product shoot, setting up lights and testing lenses, trying to convince himself that Mia's chaos was beginning to fade. For the first time in weeks, he felt a small sense of control returning. That feeling lasted less than an hour. At exactly 10:17 a.m., Ethan heard the rumble of a large engine outside the building. When he looked out the window, his breath caught. A moving truck, an actual full-sized moving truck, was parked directly in front of the studio entrance. And Mia was standing beside it, clipboard in hand, dressed like someone arriving to claim property she believed was hers. Ethan ran downstairs, heart pounding, just in time to see her waving the movers toward the door. She pointed at the studio, as if she owned the place. One of the workers asked if she had a key. Mia smiled, lifted the old spare key Ethan had never gotten back, and said she was retrieving her belongings. Ethan stepped between her and the door, insisting she had no right to take anything. That's when Mia's voice changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't frantic. It was cold, rehearsed, almost official sounding as she accused him of stealing from her, of withholding property she claimed to have bought, of trying to erase her contributions. The movers hesitated, unsure who to believe. Mia pulled out a stack of papers and waved them dramatically, claiming they were proof of ownership. Ethan grabbed the documents, and his stomach dropped when he realized they were nothing but printed emails, scribbled notes, and vague invoices that meant absolutely nothing. There wasn't a single receipt for equipment or any contract with her name on it. He told her the papers weren't valid proof of anything. Mia's face twisted, and she began shouting that he was hiding evidence. She tried to push past him, reaching for a case of lenses near the front of the studio. Ethan blocked her again, telling her he would call the police if she didn't leave. Instead of backing down, Mia stepped away and pulled out her phone, loudly pretending to report Ethan for locking her out of her own workspace. The accusation was so absurd that the movers exchanged glances, no longer buying into her performance. Within minutes, the actual police arrived. Mia rushed toward them with dramatic urgency, pointing at Ethan and accusing him of confiscating thousands of dollars worth of her gear. She handed the officers the same meaningless papers. The officers took their time reading them, then calmly asked if she had any real receipts, legal documents, or proof of purchase. Mia's confidence began to crack. She stammered, trying to justify each item with vague stories that didn't line up. Eventually, the officers pulled Mia aside and explained that without verifiable evidence, she had no grounds to take anything from the studio. They told her she needed to leave the premises immediately. Mia's expression hardened into something venomous. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She simply leaned in close enough for Ethan to hear and whispered that this wasn't over, that he would lose everything when she was done. Then she climbed into the truck, slammed the door, and ordered the driver to leave. As the engine faded in the distance, Ethan stood frozen on the sidewalk, realizing that he had just witnessed the beginning of something far more dangerous than arguments or rumors. Mia had crossed a line, and she had no intention of turning back. The days following the moving truck incident felt strangely quiet, almost like the silence before a storm. Ethan tried to focus on work, telling himself that Mia had finally run out of ways to interfere. But deep down, he knew her well enough to recognize that silence was never a sign of surrender. It was preparation. The storm arrived 3 days later in the form of a lawsuit. A thick envelope stamped with legal insignia appeared in Ethan's mailbox, demanding $45,000 in damages for property Mia claimed he had stolen. The claims were outrageous and filled with contradictions, but the document was real, filed through an online court system that allowed almost anybody to submit a complaint. Ethan felt his pulse spike as he read each page, realizing she was determined to drag him into a legal battle built entirely on fiction. Before he could process it, more trouble followed. One morning, he arrived at the studio and found the lock jammed, thick glue smeared deep inside the keyhole. He tugged, twisted, and tried every trick he knew, but the door wouldn't budge. The building manager had to call a locksmith, who shook his head and said it looked deliberate. Ethan already knew who was responsible. Later that afternoon, as he checked his inbox, he discovered dozens of forwarded emails, messages sent from fake accounts, all containing false claims about him. Some accused him of unprofessional behavior. Some implied he had mistreated clients. Others suggested he was mentally unstable. Each email had been sent to random businesses, colleagues, and former clients, leaving him scrambling to reassure people that none of it was true. But the worst discovery came when the building management called him in for a meeting. He walked into the office expecting another conversation about noise, scheduling, or equipment storage. Instead, the property manager slid a set of documents across the table, documents that claimed Mia was a legal co-tenant of the studio space. The papers included a forged rental agreement with her signature, placed next to a shaky imitation of Ethan. There were also fake payment records showing transfers Mia supposedly made toward rent, all of them doctored with unrealistic dates and impossible numbers. Ethan stared at the papers in disbelief, feeling the ground shift beneath him. Mia hadn't just escalated. She had crossed fully into criminal territory. The manager admitted something felt off, especially because the payment receipts looked like blurry screenshots stitched together. But Mia had emailed them repeatedly, insisting Ethan was blocking her access to property she shared. The building had been moments away from launching an internal review that could have temporarily suspended Ethan's lease. He explained everything, laying out the months of harassment, break-ins, and false claims. The manager listened, his expression gradually tightening with concern. He told Ethan to contact a lawyer immediately. That night, Ethan sat at his kitchen table, surrounded by documents, real ones from his lease, and the fake ones Mia had created. His lawyer confirmed what he feared. The situation had shifted into a legal battlefield, one where Mia's actions could no longer be dismissed as emotional instability. They were deliberate, planned, possibly criminal. The lawyer prepared the first set of countermeasures, including a harassment report and a request for a restraining order. Ethan felt exhausted, unable to understand how someone he once loved could fabricate an entire alternate reality just to keep control over him. But the lawyer's final words stayed with him long after the meeting ended. "This is more than revenge," she said. "She's trying to rewrite the story so she comes out as the victim, and people like that don't stop until someone stops them." Ethan finally realized he was no longer dealing with a breakup. He was dealing with someone willing to destroy his life piece by piece. And she had only just begun. The restraining order hearing was still weeks away, and Ethan hoped that the legal pressure would make Mia slow down. But instead of retreating, she escalated in a way he hadn't even imagined possible. One morning, as he checked his analytics, he noticed an unusual spike in traffic to his website. The traffic wasn't coming from clients or photography blogs. It was coming from a brand new site he'd never heard of, one with a name disturbingly close to his own. Curious and uneasy, he clicked the link. What he saw made his entire body tense. Mia had created an entire website dedicated to destroying him. The homepage featured a dramatic headline accusing Ethan of fraud, manipulation, and emotional abuse, none of which had ever happened. There were sections filled with long, exaggerated stories about their relationship, each twisted to portray her as a victim and him as some predatory mastermind. She even uploaded staged screenshots of text conversations that he immediately recognized as fabricated, wrong fonts, wrong timestamps, and messages he had never written. But the damage wasn't limited to the website. Mia had also posted dozens of fake reviews on multiple platforms, all painting him as unprofessional, dangerous, and dishonest. Some reviewers claimed he had stolen their photos. Others insisted he had threatened them. A few even said he'd screamed at them during shoots, describing scenes that had never taken place. The pattern was obvious, but to anyone who didn't know the context, it looked like a flood of serious complaints. Ethan spent hours flagging and reporting the reviews, but each time one got removed, two more would appear. It felt like trying to stop a leak with his bare hands. He called his lawyer, who told him to document everything: the URLs, the timestamps, the usernames Mia had used. And when they began tracing the information, the truth became even clearer. Many of the domains and accounts were registered with emails tied to Mia's old usernames, some linked directly to her personal information. She hadn't even tried to hide it. It was as if she believed she was invincible. The lawyer began compiling a thick packet of evidence for the restraining order hearing, each screenshot strengthening Ethan's case. But Ethan still had to deal with the immediate consequences. Clients were calling, confused or worried, asking if the rumors were true. A few canceled upcoming sessions because they didn't want to risk involvement in drama. Every cancellation cut deeper, not just financially, but emotionally. Photography had always been Ethan's escape, his sanctuary, and now even that was being poisoned by someone who refused to let him breathe. The breaking point came when he received a message from a longtime client who said she was uncomfortable returning because she had read disturbing things online. Ethan wrote a long explanation, but part of him wondered how many others had seen Mia's fabrications and silently chosen to walk away. When the day of the court hearing finally arrived, Ethan felt both anxious and relieved. He walked into the courtroom with a binder full of proof, expecting a long battle. But surprisingly, the judge barely needed 20 minutes. The evidence was overwhelming: domain registrations in Mia's name, IP addresses matching her home network, fabricated screenshots, forged claims, and harassment emails. Mia sat stiffly, her confidence cracking as the judge questioned her. She tried to deny everything, but the facts were undeniable. By the end of the hearing, the ruling was clear. The restraining order would be extended for a full year. She was legally required to remove all defamatory content. And she was ordered to pay Ethan's attorney fees related to the case. Mia didn't look at Ethan once as she left the courtroom. But her shoulders were rigid, her jaw clenched, her footsteps sharp with quiet rage. Ethan watched her go, thinking it might finally be over. But the hollow pit in his stomach told him something else. People who lived in delusions didn't simply stop. They regrouped. They waited. And Mia was far from done. In the weeks following the court ruling, Ethan finally allowed himself to breathe again. The restraining order felt like a protective barrier, something solid between him and Mia's relentless obsession. For a moment, he believed the worst had passed. But what he didn't know was that Mia had already shifted her strategy, moving from harassment and defamation into something far darker and far riskier. She had decided to reinvent herself, not as a victim, not as an ex-girlfriend, but as a business owner. And the business she chose to claim was Ethan. It started when the building owner contacted Ethan asking for a meeting. His tone was polite but oddly cautious, as if he were preparing for uncomfortable news. When Ethan arrived, he was handed a new batch of documents allegedly proving Mia's claim of co-ownership. These weren't the sloppy, blurry forgeries she had submitted before. These were refined, meticulously formatted contracts with digital signatures, fake bank statements, and a fabricated paper trail that looked disturbingly authentic at first glance. Ethan explained once again that Mia had no legal stake in the studio, but the owner confessed that Mia had been visiting the property regularly, confidently insisting she deserved access. She had even attempted to set up a meeting with their commercial leasing department, pretending she was preparing for an expansion. The idea seemed absurd, but then the second blow dropped. 3 investors, strangers to Ethan, arrived at the studio unannounced, asking to speak to the other owner. They introduced themselves as business partners who had each contributed money to Mia's studio expansion project, totaling nearly $30,000. They expected a tour, a breakdown of future plans, and updates on the build-out schedule. Ethan stared at them in disbelief, trying to process the reality in front of him. Mia hadn't just forged documents. She had built an entire investment pitch around his studio, using stolen photos, false financial projections, and fabricated claims about her role in building the business. The investors showed him the pitch deck she had given them, complete with graphs, projected profits, and a fantasy narrative about her leadership. Every slide was a lie, yet presented convincingly enough to secure real money. The investors grew tense as Ethan explained the truth, especially when he showed them the restraining order and court documents declaring that Mia had no connection to the studio whatsoever. Their shock turned to anger, then to panic. They demanded refunds they would never receive. They called her, but she didn't answer. Within hours, the situation spiraled into a full fraud report filed with the police. Law enforcement moved quickly, given the evidence. Mia was arrested at her apartment, taken into custody not just for fraud, but also for violating the restraining order, again. For days afterward, Ethan watched the aftermath unfold with a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. Mia lost her job when her employer learned about the charges. Her social accounts vanished. Whispers about her behavior started circulating through the community. But the consequences didn't stop there. Investigators uncovered even more fabricated transactions, more attempts to manipulate property records, and additional incidents where she pretended to be part owner of businesses that weren't hers. It became clear that Mia had constructed an entire identity around claims that never belonged to her. As the criminal case built against her, Ethan found himself processing a disturbing truth. She hadn't been acting out of heartbreak or desperation. She had been acting out of delusion, an entire fantasy world where she was entitled to everything Ethan had built. And she was willing to deceive anyone, break any law, and burn any bridge to maintain that fantasy. The studio slowly returned to normal, but Ethan often caught himself glancing at the door, listening for footsteps that would never come again. He knew the legal process would take time, and he would have to testify eventually. But for the first time in months, he felt like the story wasn't slipping out of his hands. It was finally turning back in his favor. Mia, meanwhile, was heading toward a future shaped entirely by her own choices. A future made of consequences she could no longer escape. When the final hearing concluded, Ethan stepped out of the courthouse feeling lighter than he had in months. The judge's ruling was clear, firm, and left no room for Mia to twist reality again. Her sentence required restitution, mandatory therapy, and a long-term restriction preventing her from approaching him or the studio. For the first time, accountability had caught up to her. Ethan returned to the studio that afternoon and felt a quiet stillness that he hadn't experienced in a long time. The space no longer carried the tension of her threats or the fear of her next unpredictable move. It finally felt like his again. He poured himself into rebuilding the business, reconnecting with clients, and restoring the sense of community that had once defined the place. Bit by bit, life regained its rhythm. Friends who had watched the chaos unfold told him they saw a spark returning to his eyes, something steady and grounded. He knew the scars of the ordeal would stay with him, but he also recognized the strength he had gained through surviving it. As the months passed, the memory of Mia's turmoil faded into the background, no longer a shadow hovering over every decision. The future felt open, calm, and entirely his to shape.